So at the time of this recording, we are now 2 days removed from the probable last match of Juan Martin Del Potro's career. I've got to say, like for a lot of others, for me, when I heard the news, this was a real gut punch. You know, just about everything that is profound that you could say about this guy has been thrown around on social media already. If you've checked it ever since Sunday, where Delpo announced that this is probably going to be it for him, you've heard stuff like your favorite player's favorite player. Darren Cahill once said something along the lines of, if Juan Martin Del Potro isn't your favorite player, he's almost certainly your second favorite player. And there's really not a better way to encapsulate his impact on tennis fans, his relationship with tennis fans across the board, pretty much unanimously. You can easily say the guy was one of the most loved players of all time. And so this week has become all the more bittersweet to see him have to walk away as a result. Just about everybody that's even followed the sport for the slightest amount of time will know of Juan Martin's long documented injury history. I've talked a little bit about the off-court impact he had so far and how he touched all of our hearts. But as far as the on-court stuff was concerned, and continuing on with those injuries I was talking about, it's probably what's going to leave his on-court legacy as being the biggest what-if men's tennis ever had. And I'm sure that's going to come up in people's minds all the time when they look back on his career. That is not to say that we should always look back on his career now and just be mourning over what could have been. You know, this guy's ability was monstrous. The potential was endless when we talk about a career that included one of the greatest Grand Slam wins of all time, 20 plus titles, a tremendous Masters 1000 win, and maybe most importantly to him, one of the greatest international competition players of all time as far as team events were concerned, and representing his country Argentina, and all in all producing some of the highest peaks we've seen of the 21st century that went toe-to-toe with quite literally everybody that was a part of what I believe was the golden age of men's tennis from the late 2000s to early 2010s. And while there will always be a part of all of us looking back that will ask what could have been without all the brutal injury luck that he had, there is no doubt that he still carved out his own chapter during that era I'm talking about. And quite simply, you cannot write the story of that golden era without including Juan Martin Del Potro in it. So with that being said, I want to get on with this video, pay tribute to the Tower of Tondil, talk about this farewell match and just his career as a whole, and of course some of the great memories it gave us along the way. So for me, my first memory of Juan Martin Del Potro came when my father came home from work, took like a half day, came back to see the 2009 US Open final. And I didn't know it at the time because I wasn't that big into tennis yet. But all of this for my father and probably others alike was to watch another coronation of who, at that point in time, Roger Federer, was pretty much the newly minted greatest tennis player of all time, and having another remarkable year, remarkable stretch from the clay season, and winner of the last two slams. And knowing what I know now, yes, while Delpo was on a roll of his own and made huge strides throughout 2008 and especially then 2009, at the end of the day, he was playing the defending 5-time US Open champion Roger Federer, who was on a 41-match win streak at the US Open at that point. And he was just supposed to be a footnote in another great dominant Federer year, in spite of the fact that Juan Martin was just coming off the biggest demolition job of Rafa Nadal in a major really ever. We hadn't seen it before, we haven't seen it since. But at that time, Federer on Ashe was a completely different animal, and for the better part of 2 sets, things were unfolding just as a lot of people expected. You know, we know the story. Fed was in full flight for the opening part of this match, and Del Potro tight as a drum, all the way up until 6-3, 5-4, 30 love. And at the time, in a slam against Roger Federer, that was as good as game, set, match. I don't really want to talk about what Federer didn't do, but once Del Potro was given the opening, that was all he needed. I can't really speak much on the viewing experience of that match itself, but what I can say is I distinctly remember sitting in my living room and seeing those 2 thunderbolt forehands. I don't even need to specify the point in time in which they happened in the 4th set. You know what I'm talking about. He just massacred and obliterated these 2 balls in the 4th set. I believe one was clocked at like 114, the other at 110. But for that to stick out for a kid who at the time was 8 years old and whose favorite player was Rafa Nadal only because his hair looked cool, yeah, it was just special stuff. I mean, you saw it 9 years later, almost, at Wimbledon in 2018, when in the 5th, Del Potro cracked like in 107 against Rafa in that epic quarterfinal match they played at Wimbledon. And Andy Murray, who was commentating that match, you saw his reaction. It was everything. He just started laughing in disbelief. Same with Nadal on the receiving end of it. It has always just been a thing of beauty when Juan Martin is stretched to the end of his range on the run, unloading on a forehand. And when he unloaded on those 2 forehands, followed by another great get that saw him high-fiving the crowd, it just seemed like there was something in the air. One of those moments where it seemed like destiny. It's like, he can't lose after that. And from the jaws of defeat, Juan Martin Del Potro did it as a 20-year-old, captured what was the tournament of his dreams, the US Open, delivered a moment for the ages, and I mean it when I say that this was one of the greatest Grand Slam runs of all time, because if you zoom out, I already laid out what a big favorite Federer was going in, but if you zoom out even more, before the 2009 US Open victory by Del Potro, the last non-Big 3 player to have won a slam was Murat Safin at the 2005 Australian Open. That means we went 18 straight tournaments with all Big 3 wins after that 2005 Australian Open. And get this, from the 2005 French Open all the way up until 2012 Wimbledon, Juan Martin Del Potro's win at the 2009 US Open stood alone as the only non-Big 3 win in 30 tournaments in that span, from the 05 French all the way to 2012 Wimbledon. That is absolutely bonkers. Plus he did it beating Nadal and Federer along the way, a feat that's only been done one other time in a major. And this slam really encapsulated so much of what he represented as a player. He was such a fighter. Obviously we know what he did, how mentally tough he had to be to keep coming back from the injuries he had. But even within these matches, he was such a fighter. In a position against Federer in the final where most people would probably have been too demoralized, he fought long enough to give himself a second wind in that match. And it's truly beautiful how it ended up happening for Del Potro, because throughout 2009, you saw at the beginning of the year, obviously big things were expected. In 08, he went on like a 23-match winning streak, spanning from post-Wimbledon all the way through the US Open quarters. Obviously big things were expected, but then a dose of reality hit when Roger Federer absolutely clubbed him at the Australian Open. I think it was like 3-0-0 or something like that. And then each successive time he got closer and closer against Federer that he played him that year. Madrid was closer, and then the French Open, he almost beat him, had a 2-1 lead. Really high quality match there between the two. And then at the end of the year, in the last major of the year, he finally got over that hump. And from that point on, he looked like a sure shot to be the next big thing, but unfortunately, from the end of 2009, he really never was that same guy, really, for a consistent stretch ever again. Straight off the bat at the 2010 Australian Open, you could tell something was wrong with the way he was hitting his forehand that tournament, and you can still see it if you look at highlights from the Blake match during that tournament, and lo and behold, right wrist injury took him out effectively for that whole season pretty much. And from that point on, it became pretty much a pattern of his career. But you can't say enough of how impressive it was for him multiple times throughout his career to dip so low in the rankings because of this extended timeout, and every time find his way back up to the top of the game. This right wrist injury saw him start 2011 as low as ranked 485 in the world. And while 2011 wasn't stellar for him, he got better in 2012, and he got even better in 2013, to the point where you could see some flashes of that guy from 08-09. Some signature victories that year, incredible Indian Wells tournament, and then played an absolute classic of a match against Novak Djokovic in the Wimbledon semifinals. Another one of those matches that displayed just the tremendous potential he had and the monstrous peaks he could scale that could go toe-to-toe with just about anybody. 2013 saw him re-enter the top 5, and then just when you thought he was back here to stay, we learn of an ailing left wrist, this time through the early portion of 2014. And for all intensive purposes, that took him out 2 years. 2014 and 2015 were a wash for him, and when he came back in 2016, he's out of the top 1,000. And when you watched him play when he came back from this left wrist injury, you could tell that backhand was just never going to be the same. He was slicing, it seemed like at the time, more than half of the shots on his backhand, and he wasn't really able to get off the ground up until mid-season that year in 2016. Wimbledon probably did him a world of confidence to beat Stan Wawrinka, a match that Stan really gave away more than Delpo winning it, but nonetheless, tremendous win given the circumstances, and still in spite of that, you would have never been able to guess what would come next. Man, those Rio Olympics were crazy. I have always been of the belief that 2016 was one of the more forgettable and poorer years on tour in recent memory, but Juan Martin Del Potro in the second half of this year absolutely provided a spark that was desperately needed. Yeah, Djokovic, now we know, was at the beginning of the worst slump of his career, but at the time it seemed like that Wimbledon loss to Querrey was only going to be a blip, and he was just going to take gold here and get stuff right back on track. Delpo winning this match was a pipe dream, don't get it twisted, and then the match actually happened, and he was hitting the cover off these forehands. Djokovic didn't seem like he knew what hit him, and this was a match of the Del Potro forehand in full flight. He was hitting winners from just about everywhere, and when that match point net cord dribbled over, at that moment you knew Juan Martin Del Potro was back. And he rode that all the way to the final, which included a run that saw a semi-win over Rafa Nadal, very thrilling match. And this dude pretty much cold off the couch gave the guy who was going to end the year number 1 in the final, in Andy Murray, a tougher match than 2016 Nadal would have, and while it came up short, it was nothing short of miraculous that he found himself in this position, and That only carried its way through the rest of the year and the rest of his comeback stint from 16 to 18. And the heroics for Argentina weren't even done yet for 2016. He probably gave us our last great memory of the Davis Cup as it used to be, exacted a bit of revenge in the Davis Cup semifinals over Andy Murray, in which he was able to come out in probably the match of that year, 5 hours plus in the 5th set over Andy Murray. A match played in Great Britain, raucous crowd, and Juan Martin won everybody's hearts yet again. And he still wasn't done. Followed that up in the final, key role in Argentina taking the Davis Cup that year. He really was the centerpiece there, and then played an epic against Marin Cilic down 2-0. He rallied, kept Argentina's hopes alive, in which they ultimately prevailed in a deciding rubber. And yeah, I mean, as incredible as his one Grand Slam win was, his exploits representing Argentina in the Olympics and Davis Cup really are nothing short of the stuff of legend. And then personally up next, my favorite Juan Martin Del Potro memory perhaps, that 2017 match on Grandstand against Dominic Thiem at the US Open. Ever since I saw this match, I have considered it to be the greatest comeback I have ever seen in tennis. You know, circumstances aside, with it only being a 4th round match and all of that, just the hole that Del Po found him in, he looked dead in the water. He was ill in this match and was clearly hampered by that, and was absolutely blown off the court in the first 2 sets of this match by a redlining Dominic Thiem. And those first 2 sets, the two did not look like they belonged on the same court. It looked like Juan Martin was going to be out of here in very short order. And you know, 2 sets down, 3 games won during those 2 sets. Then a breakdown in the 4th. I believe it got to 5-2 down in that 4th. Serving 2-5 love 30. Then team up 5-3 30 love. Then 2 match points at 5-6 15-40. 2 swings of the Del Potro racket on the serve, and they were erased with the most precise serving. And perhaps the most memorable image of this match, after finding his way out of all of those holes, he was up 6-1 in the 4th set breaker, 5 set points, could throw caution to the wind at this point. We were pretty much guaranteed a 5th set. Dominic Thiem unloads on this almost half volley forehand into the Del Potro forehand, and in a career of Pantheon great forehands on the run, you just knew what was going to happen. Roger Federer learned this the hard way in that 2009 US Open final. If you were gonna go hard into the Del Potro forehand, chances were that ball was going to come back even harder, and with one swipe of that Del Potro forehand, he had somehow stolen that set. And oh man, that US Open crowd always had a special relationship with him. The way that grandstand crowd erupted in reaction to that shot, followed by that signature Del Potro roar, was truly just spine-chilling stuff. And as we know, in that 5th, he pulled out one of the most unlikeliest of wins. To this day, I still have no idea how he was able to come out on the winning end of that match, and he still was able to follow that up with a bit of deja vu and upset Roger Federer in 4 in the very next match. That run to the US Open semi obviously set him up for a big 2018, and it's really sad how that year ended, given the fact that Del Potro finally seemed to have gotten a hang on hitting this new backhand at the end of 2017 into 2018, and what resulted was probably his most consistent year ever. Won an epic against Roger at Indian Wells, featured in another one of the matches of the year against Rafa at the quarters at Wimbledon, semis of the French before that, and finally was able to return to the US Open final and reach a career high world number 3. And when you look back at 2018 now, it's really jarring to think, because the US Open has been the stage where Del Potro has thrived the most. He's had his greatest moments there, and you think back to that 2018 final, things looked to be on such an uptick for Juan Martin. That 2018 final is going to end up being his last match played at that tournament. And being on the scene back then, you never would have expected that to be some of the last bit of elite Juan Martin Del Potro, or even Juan Martin Del Potro in general, we would ever see. I mean, in record time, he had gone from 1,045 in the world to 38 by the end of that year, then to 11 the next year, and then all the way to a career high 3. Never could have imagined that he would have to do this again, but alas, Shanghai 2018, that broken patella really ended up being the straw that broke the camel's back, and we didn't know it at the time. And all the way until I actually saw him on court on Tuesday, I was still under the impression that, hey, this guy can still do it. He has done this so many times before. Hell, he came from outside the top 1,000 all the way back to the top 3. But then one glimpse of him on the court, and he was giving it everything he had. But you could tell very quickly at age 33, there was just nothing left to give. And by the end, you knew, even though he'd said he might try to play Rio, you knew this was it. And yeah, that absolutely sucks. But the send-off was absolutely beautiful in front of his home fans, his mother attending his final match. Of course, having never attended one of his matches before. And it was just really, really refreshing to hear those Argentinian fans back out in full force for a tennis match to support their prodigal son one last time. And he deserved it all. He deserves all of the outpour of love he's received. He touched us tennis fans all around the world in a way that few others ever have over the last decade plus. You know, the proof is in the pudding right here. You don't talk about many single-time Grand Slam champions the way a lot of us do Delpo, and he will always hold a special place in a lot of our hearts. And all I can say to close this video is I wish him all the best in retirement. Hopefully, life after tennis isn't as painful as much of his on-court career was. It's definitely bittersweet, but farewell to Juan Martin Del Potro, the Tower of Tondil, truly a gentle giant.